everyone, and welcome to what could eventually someday be a full episode of The Completionist, but it's actually a little bit different. Now, in the name of full transparency, everyone at home, this is a brand new video, aka I am being paid to talk to you about this game today. The developers, Actual Nerds, wanted me to, that's the name of the company by the way, Actual Nerds, wanted me to lend my eyes and expertise to their new title, The Tarnishing of Juxtia. And I figured this would be a great opportunity to speak to you guys at home about how I approach a game when I decide to complete it for the show, right? I tend to complete a game, get all the way through it, and think to myself, hey, this is for the show or it's not. But this upcoming Steam game does have a lot of the ingredients that I love when it comes to Souls-likes and platformers and action adventures and hack and slashes, right? And after playing a bunch of it, I'm going to highlight my thought process again, going through this whole thing. And again, this is not a full episode of The Completionist. This is my first assessment of The Tarnishing of Juxtia. Let's begin. Life as The Completionist can be tough. I divide my time among keeping up with the biggest, most challenging games of the year, grinding out the rest of New Game Plus, and trying to complete whatever is the new hotness as fast as humanly possible. But even with all of that going on, I've got to keep my eye on the horizon, and to any opportunity I might have to get early hands-on access to a title that I could potentially complete. These are moments of research and help inform me of what later I might complete down the line. Going to PAX very often, showcasing games at Indie Land, or even diving into early access builds or open betas are precious hands-on experiences. I'm also always passionate about seeing what devs in the indie spaces are working on, and that's why it's a delight and a pleasure to feature a glimpse of an upcoming dark fantasy action RPG, The Tarnishing of Juxtia. As I've grown older, one thing I'm proud to say is that I've continued to develop my tastes. I'm often known as a Nintendo YouTuber or the 3D platformer action guy, sometimes even a JRPG guy. But honestly, I've never stopped to embrace and learn to love all kinds of games. The Tarnishing of Juxtia is something I don't think I would have had much of an appetite for 10 years ago. But having fallen deep into the rabbit hole of different Souls-like RPGs, I feel right at home with this. The Tarnishing of Juxtia draws on a lot of different influences. There are the obvious ones. The player controls a broken soul dropped into a hostile world, dealing with the catastrophic offense of gods and prophets beyond their understanding. There are dozens of different weapons and armor sets to find, and the usual role-playing mechanics here, meaning that I could use experience points earned by defeating enemies to upgrade different stats and improve my tools and abilities along the way. There is a maze-like world to be explored, packed full of vicious enemies that could kill me with just a few hits. And it's all in 2D with a gorgeous pixelated art style, which if you all know me, I love me some good pixel art. But what makes Juxtia noteworthy to me is how it plays within its framework to create something bold, unique, and honestly, quite fun. I don't know about you guys, but I sometimes hear the phrase dark fantasy action RPG and I can feel my eyes glaze over. Does the world really need another brutally difficult entry into the space? Can my cold, dead heart feel wonder or awe after battling through endless cathedrals and hearing dozens of haunting scores? After playing a bunch of this, I can confidently say, yeah, because The Tarnishing of Juxtia makes enough bold choices to feel distinct even in a saturated sea. So when I do like a first impressions video like this, I'm often thinking ahead and imagining what it would be like to complete this game entirely. I do a little projecting and extrapolate from the hours what I play what the full journey could look like. Juxtia's combat alone would make this game worth completing. Yeah, I've played what feels like a million action RPGs at this point in my life, but hey, this one still feels novel. More importantly, it feels streamlined in some really important ways. Early on, I was ready to write off the combat. I don't mean to be the guy who's seen it all once before, but I sometimes feel like I have. The player character has a melee attack, a dodge roll, and a magic spell. You can swap weapons easily, but you can only equip 2 at a time. Spamming attacks and spells eats up the stamina and MP bars, which fill up on their own slowly. Yet Juxtia immediately makes some changes that feels both vital and novel. Rather than stress the importance of blocking or parrying, a staple of the Souls-like genre, The Tarnishing of Juxtia wants players to master their energy rush system. Essentially, the game wants players to land consecutive attacks without getting hit. There's basically a combo meter in the bottom left corner of the screen, with a different amount of links in it depending on what weapons you've equipped. Every hit fills up a node, and if you're able to max out the bar, you are gifted with a massive combat bonus, unlimited stamina, and a rapidly refilling MP meter. Landing strikes without being interrupted becomes essential. And yes, I realize that the strategy of don't get hit might not be breaking new ground here, but I liked how in this game if I fought well, I was constantly rewarded for my adventures. Juxtia is a game that rewards a super aggressive playstyle, which I really enjoy. If you're able to get right up to an enemy's face and strike them enough times to trigger that energy rush, you basically have unlimited stamina. And I liked how the weapons feel different, though I found myself sticking to swords over short-range daggers or heavier weapons like hammers. Every blade has a certain heft to it, making combat generally feel very satisfying. The energy rush mechanic even applies to the powerful relics I earned from defeating bosses. These super moves can only be used after fully landing combos without being touched and in a short time frame. These relics can be unleashed in a flurry of particle effects. It always felt really good to slash foes, dodge their attacks, stab them in the back, and then wreck whoever else was around with a special move before doing it all over again on the next set of enemies. Now, since everything is in 2D, it is easy to read enemy attack patterns and understand their reach. Once I pushed through the first couple of boss fights, I found myself eager to mix it up with any enemies I came across. Bosses themselves feel really epic, and the art direction here puts them over the top. They're tough, but not too tough. If you're able to take a breath and observe your foes, you'll be able to take them down in just a couple of attempts. That streamlined design quality I mentioned earlier applies to the boss fights too, as save points are smartly placed, and I never had to travel that far back to get back in the fray. The level design is another highlight here. It is easy to claim that a game is Souls inspired, but in this case, the description fits really well. It isn't just the combat in Juxtia that feels demanding. Exploring levels forced me to take my surroundings into consideration too. Dodging enemy attacks and environmental hazards feels elegant, especially in the areas with ancient magical turrets. It does help that the art direction for the Tarnishing of Juxtia is exceptionally strong. Like I said, I will always have a soft spot for pixel art RPGs, and this one really hits home for me. Larger character sprites like the Weaveress or the Drowned Brother boss look incredible in motion, but even the smaller, more human-sized enemies look cool too. It's a dark, medieval / gothic world that feels dangerous and maybe even beyond saving. A grimy, gritty wasteland populated with a handful of survivors trying to scrap by. Similar to the Souls-like genre, the lore is kind of ambiguous. Item descriptions are often the key to understanding characters and bosses. Certain players might find it frustrating that you have to go into the pause menu and read it to get a sense of what's happening, but honestly I didn't mind it all that much because the world is pretty intriguing. Or maybe at this point I've just been so into Souls games that I just understand it all. The further I got into the game, the more I appreciated the different factions circling each other and the competing interests that make the world interesting. The player character is a swordsman made up of bandages, the last creation of the goddess Juxtia, tasked with defeating a great evil. I've mentioned how the world is hostile and unforgiving, and that's because of the titular tarnishing, which has turned a once beautiful land into an alien-looking landscape. Noble knights have been corrupted, and horrifying tentacles have wrapped around once holy sites. I felt motivated to do what I could to uncover what was going on and cleanse the world of this evil. And there's a ton here that impressed me. I mentioned how the detailed environments invite exploration, but there are some quite cleverly hidden secrets only the most curious will find. I found a lot of satisfaction in coming across a new spell just beyond a difficult enemy encounter, or finding some upgrade materials after a tough platforming section. Some areas cannot be found unless you're actively trying to find invisible walls. The map reminds me of a lot of classic games, slowly being filled out the more you explore. Going full completionist and seeing the entire map revealed would undoubtedly be very satisfying. I also appreciate that the Tarnishing of Juxtia is far more straightforward in terms of traditionally opaque RPG mechanics. Take weapon scaling, for instance. In games that inspired this one, scaling is one of those things that no one tells you how to understand. You just kind of have to experiment with stats and upgrades until things click for you. Here, I was always aware of how my stats impacted my weapons and armor. It felt very empowering and took away some of the guesswork of where to put my experience points. Since I rarely found myself using spells because I liked getting in close combat and perfecting my sword strikes, I could put most of my upgrades into dexterity and strength instead of feeling like I had to spread things around evenly. It's a small thing, but removing this layer of abstractedness helped me enjoy Juxtia more. It feels straightforward and helped me build momentum to keep playing the game. I think that's perhaps one of the game's greatest strengths. It is constantly encouraging players to push forward. Everything is built on momentum, and this is famously a genre where momentum is difficult to keep. You can be having a blast in a Souls game, killing enemies and exploring your surroundings, only to run smack into a stumbling block that impedes you for hours. That didn't really happen here to me. I fully embraced the energy rush driven combat and found myself compelled to keep on busting down bosses and earning new gear. That's another thing. I really enjoyed how easy it was to digest the process of keeping track of everything. Inventory slots are right there in the pause menu. I knew what I was working towards at any given moment. In the past, I've hesitated about trying to complete games like this because I was always afraid about missing out on some random piece of gear or weapon or something like that. But in Juxtia, all that stuff is laid out incredibly cleanly. Every piece of equipment or spell has its own slot, and as a completionist, I do love seeing a nice, cleanly organized UI. All that being said, I don't know that I loved everything I played here. As I said, I didn't find much of a compelling reason to use spells when the melee combat had a much greater impact on me. Once I became pretty good at dodging, I didn't find myself going out of my way to optimize my gear as much. I found 2 or 3 weapons that worked fairly early on, and stuck with those for at least 5 bosses. I don't necessarily hold that against the Tarnishing of Juxtia though. This genre can be about mastering equipment a few pieces at a time. Maybe in another playthrough, I'd take more of an effort to pursue a different specialty, or had I continued a little bit further, I might have encountered some spells that would make me reassess my build. As much as I was excited about the focus on relentless aggression, I kind of wish that the block and parry options that are available later on were available from the very start of the game, just to have that option. I appreciate that the design seems very intentional, particularly to get players used to the energy rush mechanics, but I can imagine players having less experience in the Souls-like genre having a really rough time adjusting to the aggressive playstyle that is constantly being rewarded. I feel like I adapted pretty quickly, but everyone approaches games very differently. Overall, the Tarnishing of Juxtia is a great entry into the ever-growing canon of dark, difficult fantasy RPGs. Pixel art style is lush and extremely detailed. Boss fights, especially the Wraith Legion, can feel like a dance once you've mastered dodging. The energy rush mechanic is worth building an entire combat system around, and it's very clear that the developers did so here. The story is intriguing enough to keep me invested, though I can't speak to that since I didn't finish the entire game yet. I imagine this is one of those titles that only gets richer and more complex the deeper you dive in. The Tarnishing of Juxtia is the kind of game that streamlines a lot of elements that I love from contemporary game design. I wouldn't call it simple by no means, but it is simplified in a way that makes it feel approachable. There are a ton of different options to combat, and the art style is very alluring and evocative, especially for this guy right here. I love pixels, baby. The themes and tone may be a bit grim, but that doesn't mean the game is lacking bright colors or originality. It's worth digging into. So if you vibe with other games of this type, I think the Tarnishing of Juxtia will definitely scratch that itch for you. So once again, thank you for joining me as I walk through my process when it comes to completing a game like the Tarnishing of Juxtia. And thank you so much for the devs for being a fan of the show and offering this opportunity to me. And hey, if there are any other games out there that you'd want to see my early impressions of, indie or AAA, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching, and once again, I'll see you guys soon. Bye!